Thank you everyone for joining us for this panel discussion on building relationships between newcomers and Indigenous communities. We would like to take a moment to recognize that the presenters of this presentation are on Treaty 1 and Treaty 5 territory. Sorry, a little bit. There we go. Okay. The other thing that we would like to say before we begin is that the questions at the end of the presentation will be done through Slido. Hopefully you're all familiar with the Slido application, but you just log in, make sure that you are in the workshop for building relationships between newcomer and Indigenous peoples. And before you type a question, please make sure you scroll through the questions that are already there so that we can avoid repeats. If there's one that's similar to the one that you would like to ask, just give it a little thumbs up so that it can be bumped higher up the list. And we don't have to worry about a really long list. So I'm going to move it over to our first presenter, Hani Ataan from Immigration Partnership Winnipeg.
Thank you, Jamie. I hope you can hear me well, and good afternoon, everyone. I am particularly excited and also privileged to be among the other presenters, all of which are our partners in many different projects with respect to building bridges and creating ties among various communities, and in this case, specifically speaking, building bridges with our Indigenous communities here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm here to talk about our role as an organization that considered the relationship building with our Indigenous people as our first strategic priority that guided our work through the first 5 years of its establishment, since the first day that it came into being as an organization, as a project. We recognize the fact that we would not be able as an organization to create a welcome, inclusive, and a fair society without recognizing the need and the fact that this need should be identified, recognized, validated, and also made sure that people know that it is an essential need in terms of building that relationship with our Indigenous people. And when we say we, I mean the newcomer population in Manitoba, in Winnipeg. As a former refugee myself and a newcomer to this country, I do have my own personal journey with respect to the attempts that I made throughout my stay here in Winnipeg to reconnect with our Indigenous people and what that meant. And what did this give me in terms of positive energy to carry on with the work that we do. So today, really, we want to share our experiences in terms of, as an organization, why did we choose to focus on building relationships with Indigenous people here in Winnipeg, in Manitoba? And I think there are two reasons. One is really very practical reason, and that is many of the newcomers who arrived to this country, and I'm speaking about Manitoba specifically, they really don't have much to know about Indigenous people. So there is no proper orientation given to newcomers about Indigenous people from the start, pre-arrival and post-arrival. So when they arrive here, they have zero information about the Indigenous people. So it's really, it depends on the person's knowledge and level of education and how much interested they are in terms of knowing about the Indigenous people here in this country. So there is no, in our system, in the settlement sector, we do not have a structure, an orientation that can give a proper orientation, information to the newcomers about the Indigenous people of this country. And for that reason, we noticed through our work, and when I say our work, it's over decades, we noticed the gap that exists as a result of lack of information and proper orientation, we found out that this gap is already, it is increasingly widening and getting bigger and bigger between the two communities, the indigenous and the newcomers. So in 2014, and I'm giving you a little bit of history here, in 2014, we recognized, identified this need, and we thought we need to do something about it because it is a hindrance. It hinders the settlement and the integration process of the newcomers in this city that we live in, which is Winnipeg. And so we wanted to do something about it, to identify this need and do something about it. And that's the practical reason, the first reason that motivated us to do something about building the relationship with the indigenous people, due to the fact that newcomers don't know who the indigenous people are, and they don't have proper information, and the only information that they get it from the street, and the larger society. I think most of the people listening to me now, they would know that it is either they don't have the information themselves, and if they do have some information, most of their information is negative. And it is really built on stereotypes, myths, and misinformed opinions. And for that reason, it's just a vicious cycle that passes on to the newcomers who come to this country, and they adapt this ill-informed opinions or views, and it keeps the circle or the cycle going. And so we wanted to stop that cycle, this vicious cycle, by creating an orientation toolkit, an orientation comprehensive toolkit that would deal with the lack of information and lack of orientation to the newcomers upon arrival, allow them the opportunity to understand and learn about the indigenous people, and also to educate themselves about the society in which they would settle or live. And so we created this project, which is called the Indigenous Orientation Toolkit, which is a comprehensive one. And for that project, we engaged a number of partners, key indigenous partners who lead the process. We created the space, and our indigenous partners, they lead the process in terms of creating this essential toolkit to educate the sector, settlement sector, the frontline workers, and eventually their clients, in this case, the newcomers. And so you will hear from other presenters, which each one of them played a role in this comprehensive tool project that would eventually come to fruition. Our hope would be in 2021 that the settlement sector in Winnipeg and beyond would have access to through specific website where they would educate their clients and their respective community members on the indigenous communities here in Winnipeg, and depending on their local context, they would customize the information based on proper consultation with our sources. So these are basically, I'm giving you just the background of where the rest of the information is coming from. And as we speak now, we're developing the rest of the themes that go into the Indigenous Orientation Toolkit. And the ultimate goal is to fight myths, debunk myths, and replace ill-informed views with views that are based on indigenous-based information with indigenous-created information. So the newcomers and the rest of the society would see the light in terms of knowledge and allow themselves to distance themselves from the ignorance that led in some situations here in Winnipeg to some racist and discriminatory behaviors that it created the gap and contributed to the perpetuation of the barriers that prevented the two communities from getting along, and also created some divisions within the very same marginalized communities, in this case, the indigenous and the newcomers. I think I should leave the rest of the information, as I said, is going to flow hopefully naturally to cover the other pieces that I just mentioned to my colleagues here, my partners, and I'm wishing you a good, pleasant afternoon that you will enjoy and learn new information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hani. So Just a quick reminder, if you would like to ask questions, you are able to post them in Slido at any point throughout the presentation. After the presentations, we'll be doing a prepared Q&A, and then we'll be opening the floor to the questions that are on Slido. So just once more a reminder, please scroll through any questions that are already posted so that you can give a thumbs up to the ones that you agree with and would like asked, and we can avoid having multiple questions that are very similar. So I'll pass it over to Clayton Sandy.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. Again, my name is Clayton Sandy. I've been living in Winnipeg now for nearly about 42 years, 43 years. And I think my journey with immigrant people started in my career when I came into the Manitoba government. And at the time I came into the Manitoba government, I was doing my job at that time. I was doing cartography. So most of all the immigrants that worked in the different departments that I worked in were very professional. And I recall many times that I was facing a lot of racism. This was in the 70s. I was facing a lot of racism in many departments, and sometimes I would just go and connect with different people in the department. And a lot of times I'd be connecting with some of my immigrant friends. I felt that many times that when I did share information about racism, racist attitudes and different things that were going on in different departments, a lot of times people, I'm not too sure if they wanted to hear it or not, because they had a difficult time responding, and many times they hardly even responded. So I often wondered why that was, over the years. And then finally, when I started traveling with some of my colleagues, and one guy in particular, East Indian guy, we got to travel on the road quite a bit. And it wasn't until then we were able just to talk like we knew each other for many years. He shared a lot of information about his own life and his own country, and I did the same. And his name was Ifti, and Ifti and I became very good friends, and we shared a lot of different meals together, eat each other's meals, and we became lifelong friends. And it wasn't until later on, probably about maybe in different departments, I came across different immigrants. But my feeling all the time when I grew up, most of my knowledge about immigrant people came from the TV, and a lot of times it was very negative sometimes. So I kind of came with that also too. It wasn't until about 3 years ago, 2017, I was dancing powwow just outside of Winnipeg here, powwow and, and Immigrant Partnership Winnipeg had an information tent set up there. And there are about maybe 40, 50 immigrants there, and I went over and I started talking to a few people there, and then I was introduced to Hani, and we started chatting, and then later on we got together for coffee, then lunch. And as time went on, I think we become pretty good friends. But I shared some of this information with Hani many times about my feeling about different things that I've seen in Winnipeg. And probably about maybe 15 years ago, I've noticed many times when I used to go shopping in Winnipeg, and there'd be immigrant people working in some of the stores, whatever, they would treat me differently. Sometimes they would treat me with disrespect, that they didn't trust me, or they'd make sure they check my credit card 2, 3 times and stuff like that. And I used to always wonder why would they would do this coming to this country as immigrants, treat me differently. And as time went on, again, so I got to know Hani and some of his colleagues, and I started just realizing that the journey that many of the newcomers came are a similar journey towards the similar journey as the Indigenous people. A lot of different trauma in different ways, and a big part of that was basically trusting each other and basically getting to know each other. So I got to know many different people from the different immigrant community over the last maybe 3 years, more people than I've ever known. And probably through a program called Circles for Reconciliation we did with Immigrant Partnership Winnipeg a couple of years ago, we did some circles together. And at that time, I really got an insight as to the feelings of many immigrant people towards Indigenous people, and a lot of them came with misconceptions. And so basically, we're able just to sit down and just talk openly and freely, and just to dilute some of those misconceptions. A lot of times, people get to understand that our community has gone through 150 years of trauma, and this is the result of it, what they see on the streets of Winnipeg or in the papers or or on TV. So many times it's a misunderstanding. But I find that on both sides, education needs to happen. We need to start doing things together, and we need to start trusting each other. So we come with a lot of mistrust, and a lot of times that prevents growth also too. So, but I'm finding that more and more people are starting to understand and starting to want more education and starting to actually come to our ceremonies and come and try our food and stuff like that, and openly being friends with us. So that's sort of my short journey with Immigrant Partnership Winnipeg over the last 3 years. But it's been a really good time I got to spend, and I got to meet so many great people from different ethnic groups, more ethnic groups than I've ever met before. So I think that basically just working together and just sharing our personal stories together is so important, and we can actually gain friendships and start helping people in many different ways. Okay, I'll leave it there. Maybe I'll pass it on to the next presenter. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Clayton. So I just want to do one more reminder with the questions. You are able to have questions posted in Slido. I see that we have quite a few coming in, which is wonderful. Also, I would like to say that if you'd like to direct your question to a specific speaker, please put their name in the question so that we do know that it's addressed to a specific presenter. Otherwise, we will just assume that the question is for whichever presenter feels that they have the ability to answer it. So now we'll move it over to Ali Raza.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ali Raza, and I'll be talking about a report that Immigration Partnership Winnipeg launched earlier this year in January, titled Fostering Safe Spaces for Dialogue and Relationship Building Between Newcomers and Indigenous Peoples. This research was funded by the Winnipeg Foundation and authored by myself and my research partners, Darian Morton and Jenna Wirch. Just to give you some context as to how this research came about and the overall Canadian context as well. As we all know, in 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada released a historical and transformative document detailing the fraught relationship between Canada and its Indigenous population. Along with the report, 94 calls to action were outlined to sort of redress the legacies of residential schools and to facilitate a process of reconciliation. Out of the 94 calls to action, the last two calls to action, number 93 and number 94, directly pertain to newcomers. And its essence, it's asking for, or it kind of highlights the need to educate newcomers on an inclusive history of Canada, specifically as it pertains to Indigenous peoples. And there is mention of residential schools and treaties. So keeping that in mind, and now coming to Winnipeg as a context, Winnipeg has the largest proportion of urban dwelling Indigenous peoples in Canada. It also has a growing and emerging newcomer population. Overall speaking, according to various research, both communities share a lot in common, but specifically in three areas. One is history, in terms of experience encountering colonialism or colonial legacies or oppressive powers. The second area is both communities share cultural, traditional, and communal values. And last, both have similar experiences in terms of racism and socioeconomic challenges such as housing, education, employment, etc. So this makes Winnipeg an important case study on relationship building between the two communities. So in partnership with the Winnipeg Foundation and Immigration Partnership Winnipeg, this research tried to gather diverse voices, perspectives, and experiences to understand the importance of relationship building between the two communities. In total, we interviewed 38 individuals associated with both communities. These are leaders, community leaders, knowledge keepers, elders, academics, support workers. So these were the participants of our research. Now, just to give you a very brief and quick overview of our report, which we will share the link, and you can access and read it thoroughly. The report focuses on the dynamic relations between the two communities in the present context of Winnipeg. Following insights and stories shared, we suggest several wise practices for the relationship building process, as recommended by participants. In so doing, the report seeks to inform a framework related to the development of an orientation toolkit for newcomers. The report is structured in three different parts. The first part kind of covers where we currently stand as a city in terms of relationship building. And here we highlight the kind of the evolving relationship between the two communities. We cannot generalize, but we kind of highlight it's something that's evolving. We do highlight that there is a momentum that's being built on, that needs to be built on relationship building. There is awareness that's happening. A lot of community members who are working well together are trying to push the system. So that's something that's happening, but at the same time, the reality on the ground is tense and complex. There is, as Hani was mentioning, a lack of information, knowledge. There is misunderstanding, negative perceptions, and those things are there and need to be addressed. So we also kind of, to get an idea of what's happening, we cataloged a number of initiatives that are happening in the city or have happened, and this is included in the appendix section. The second part is the path forward. This section covers emerging wise practices for relationship building between newcomers and Indigenous peoples, as recommended by participants. Wise practices are organized into 4 categories. The first category is the relationship nucleus. So here what we mean is, what's the substance of this relationship? How should the relationship building process start? What's the approach to be taken? And we put forth 2 different opinions that came forth through our discussions with participants. One is, you have to set the frame right and start with history. That's the first opinion. The second is culture, and culture is a strength-based approach because both communities highly respect tradition, culture, ceremonies. You don't need translators, interpreters when it comes to culture. So that's the good way to start, and then history can be built on later. And we kind of suggest amalgamating the 2 depending on the targeted audience. The second is the need for safe spaces. A safe space is a place where people feel respected, welcomed. And so we highlight that currently there are a lot of spaces, but they're mostly generated by organizations. And there's always a mandate that's associated with that, which in itself is a good thing, but it provides a very controlled experience. And we highlight the importance of having spaces that facilitate authentic experiences. The third category is the modus operandi. This is basically actions and methods through which the relationship building process can be established. We highlight a few different methods and actions that can be taken. And just to name a few, we talk about land-based learning, storytelling, activism, allyship, meeting role models, sports, life skills, spirituality, etc. And the final part of this section is other considerations that are beyond the scope of this research. And here we mention other things that also are important and not necessarily tied to settlement, but do play an important role. So here we mention, for example, the role that the media plays, mainstream Canadian population, international students. Oftentimes, I myself was an international student. International students don't go through the normal settlement process. And so they're left out in this conversation. Finally, the last part is the orientation toolkit recommendation. An orientation toolkit was recognized, as Hani mentioned, a very important resource to support agencies serving newcomers Recommendations were gathered with the aspiration to develop a framework which can inform orientations upon arrival to Canada. IPW has been working on this for a very long time, but we tried through this research to collect specific recommendation. So this part of the report is kind of divided into 3 areas. First, what the toolkit should cover. And here we highlight a few things. History, we have compiled a list of different themes that we collected through our research. Secondly, treaties, stereotypes and addressing those, positive stories, and a list of resources, both in terms of information and resourceful people. Secondly, the method of delivery. And here, basically, when delivering on an orientation, we suggest a few methods. First, using the anti-oppression approach, linking history with contemporary issues, using experiential and interactive methodologies, and ensuring presentation and language delivery is accessible. And so that's that. And finally, we highlight the importance of having this toolkit into a living document, which is preserved, made current, continuously updated, and be accessible as a centralized resource for community workers and community members. So through this project, we hope that it will equip newcomers to play an important role, to realize that they have an important role to play in shaping and contributing to the future of Canada, a future that embodies social and environmental change, healing, and reconciliation. So that's basically the overview of the report, but you can access this in both English and French on the IPW Immigration Partnership Winnipeg website. Thank you for your attention and for listening to me, and I look forward to the discussion.
My name's Connie. I'm joining you today from the Paw, Manitoba, Treaty 5 territory. And I believe I have about 5 minutes, and I'm going to chat a little bit about, let me bookend the conversation we were just having. Let me bookend the conversation about building relationships between newcomers and Indigenous peoples. I'm a teacher by trade. I'm a curriculum developer by trade, and I was very, very fortunate to come into IPW's work as the facilitator's guide writer. Hani talked a lot about, and Hani, one of the things when you were chatting that I really picked up on was minding this gap, you know, this identifiable gap between newcomers and Indigenous Canadians. This really, this hit my heart heavy. Clayton, you talked lots about sharing personal stories, you know, building trust, sharing space, commonalities between 2 communities, and thank you for that. Ali Raza, I really, really liked listening to you talk about your research. And 3 things really stuck out with me is how you talk about newcomers in Canada and in Winnipeg, the space that we share here. All newcomers and Indigenous peoples have a shared colonial history, a colonial experience, a culture steeped in communal community values. And what really struck me when you were talking, Ali Raza, was also the shared experiences of racism, stereotyping, socioeconomic challenges. So for the next 5 minutes or so, I want to kind of bookend our chat today here and talk about the Indigenous Orientation Toolkit. So the next slide talks a bit about the process. So I came in, obviously there was much work done before I was ever so lucky to sit at the table. But the process as a curriculum developer, all curriculum, whether it's a facilitator's toolkit, whether it is a grade 11 history curriculum, my task is to take content from content expert. Content might be lived experiences, whatever our content is, and take this content and rely on our experts, and you heard 3 of them before I even come to the table here just now. Look for themes, stratify this, and then assemble it in a package whereby settlement workers and people working with newcomer community can help people go through the process of learning about it. So you can see just the steps. So these were the steps. You know, before I come in and took the content expertise and solidified it and organized it into a guide for people to take. All of this work, and you can see the screen in front of you, culminated in a 2-day pilot session. And now that I look back, Hani and Clayton and Jamie and Ali Raza, how lucky we were, because COVID hit when in March, eh? We were very, very lucky. Now I look back, we actually got to pilot it in person in Winnipeg with settlement workers in January. So imagine, I wrote the recipe with the help of everybody else, and we cooked it. We had our first kick at it, and that's what our January was. If you click ahead, Jamie, one of the founding things when we were putting this toolkit together was looking at IPW's mandate. Eh? What you see in front of you here, I actually clipped the introduction. So the toolkit itself, what is the toolkit? The toolkit is a facilitator's guide. And you can see on the screen as I'm chatting right now, it is intended to facilitate, to assist, facilitators in introducing newcomers to the history of Indigenous nations and their historical and contemporary contributions to the development of Canada. That's the first thing. My background, I already told you, is I'm a history teacher by trade. And what I found in the last 15 years, large parts of my work with different types of communities is sort of unlearning what we Canadians who are not newcomers in the last short while have learned in the past, and also helping newcomers to learn about their Indigenous friends and allies. So you can see that with combined leadership. One of the goals of this toolkit as well, folks, is to create spaces. So I'll let Jamie flip to the next side. So the toolkit again, think of you can see it here in front of you. So it is allowing settlement workers to engage in these conversations. Engage in these conversations in the ground in shared spaces. You can see our pilot, and you can see part of it. So my goal when I was writing this again, and Nikki Furland is also with me, so I mean, we did this as a partnership. What you can see in front of us is the 1-day workshop. We delivered it over 2 days. The reason we did it in 2 is because we want to have time to debrief. We wanted to have time to debrief and make better. So what you see in front of us are a variety of activities meant to engage people in a shared space, looking at, specifically in this one, you can see the facilitator's guide. The topics here are land and treaties is the way we started. So we started looking at treaty acknowledgements. You can see that on there. Building personal connections, contextualizing treaty. Why is treaty important to all Canadians? Newcomers, established Canadians, Indigenous Canadians. How does worldview fit into this? You can see that we engaged in the blanket exercise with our friends at Kairos. A couple things really drove when we were creating this toolkit too. Some of the things that really drove us, and I know I'm running out of time, so I'm looking quickly here, Jamie, was creating opportunities for people to see themselves as well. If we're learning about treaties and land, how does this apply to you as a newcomer? How does this apply to you as a settlement worker? How is this your story as a refugee? So one of our really important things that we wanted to embed in here was spaces for people to see themselves, to make meaning. I'll let you flip the slide here because I'm looking at time, Jamie. So this first toolkit was one of several that we have on the docket right now. This one was focused on land and treaties. There's a lot of content, folks. One of my goals as a teacher / curriculum developer, facilitator, is not to fire hose people with information, but to have them think introspectively and have them place this in their own personal narrative. How do they fit into this? You can see on the screen right now we have workshops on the docket with these themes as placeholders: culture and worldview, assimilation, resurgence, the Métis, family and kinship, land and water. Before I turn the floor back over to Jamie and to everybody else for questions, One other thing that really, really drove us was focusing on good stories, so that people leave a workshop buoyed with a sense of praxis and action. That was also one of our goals. Thank you, everybody. If anybody has any questions, I guess we can open the floor up now. Jamie, I'll turn it. I want to apologize again for the little glitch, and thank you for your patience, folks.
Thank you so much, Connie. Okay, so we will move back to the prepared questions. And so I'll start out again with Hani. What is the most rewarding or impactful experience you've had in working in building relationships between newcomers and Indigenous peoples?
Thank you, Jamie. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. Switch to Bluetooth. I think when it comes to the wording and the most impactful experience in terms of building relationship is to see the cultural shift. When I witnessed that, because I was part of the process, part of the journey that started from very minimal information to it's almost at a level of ignorance, all the way to gaining knowledge on a gradual base until you get to that comfort where you feel, now I feel like there is something in common with the people that I felt that they are and thought that they are very different from me, but actually there's lots in between the A point, which is ignorance or lack of information, to gain some of information that led to understand yourself as an individual, that you need to reflect, think about what you know and learn, how you're going to form your own opinions about anything in life, and specifically about groups of people that you're not necessarily familiar with. So I noticed that shift with some people that I worked with closely, and it is very, very impactful when you see people who were entrenched in a position of ignorance, and they took stance against the Indigenous people, and then through patient and long journey with structured information, that they actually, you see that cultural shift and understand it. And that led to true cemented bridges in terms of relationship building and lasting ties among the community. So that's very impactful, because I witnessed that from birth to maturity of what that meant in terms of relationship building.
Thank you so much, Hani. The next question is for Clayton. When organizations or individuals hear about your work for the first time, what sort of reception or reaction do you receive?
Many times when I'm working with new groups or new individuals, I think many times they get kind of when we tell our stories, we tell our own personal stories, and a lot of the times they're kind of taken aback by the information we share. Sometimes it's very personal, sometimes it's history that's I've heard our people for many years, and we're talking about our own pain and shame sometimes. And usually when you share that information, it connects with people who've experienced the same thing in a different way. So I find many times people seem to get on board right away. They understand exactly what I'm talking about, or some of my colleagues are talking about, when it comes time to getting to know each other and starting to move forward and bringing down barriers. And I find that we have that in common. We have a lot of trauma that we carry, and when people can stand in their truth and share that with other people, they realize that we have a lot in common. It's just that we don't see beyond that sometimes. So that's what I get many times when I talk to people. Thank you.
Thank you, Clayton. So the next question is for Connie. What do you think are some of the environmental factors that naturally bring people together from different communities, like newcomers and Indigenous peoples, or what sort of environmental factors can keep them apart?
Hi, Jamie. Well, thanks for that question. That's a good question. Some of the environmental factors that naturally bring people together, I think, is the opportunity, just as Clayton and Hani talked about, to the opportunity to share stories, to share narrative, to share common experiences. If I hearken back to the pilot, when we piloted the Indigenous Orientation Toolkit in Winnipeg in January, one of the best conversations I had at lunchtime that day, or day one or day two, we actually had a conversation with the settlement workers and the facilitation team and the team from IPW. We had a conversation. It started off looking at bannock as food, and then it turned out into a great big sharing session from different people, what the role of different cultural foods were. And instantly, you could just feel barriers melting, and you're just talking about common things. You know, we all share food, we all share stories, we all share family, we all have a narrative. And if we can create a safe space, just like I think Clayton just said, it brings people together. What are some of the environmental factors that keep us apart? Newcomers, Indigenous communities. I think stereotypes. I think misinformation. I think fear. And I'll go back to what I just said. I think lack of an ability to share a space. Thanks for your question.
Thank you so much. And the next question is for Ali. What motivated you to begin this type of work in building relationships between newcomer and Indigenous communities?
Yeah, I moved to Canada as an international student. And since the time I moved, I really hadn't heard. I was in Toronto for about 5 years. That's where I did my undergraduate studies. And I had not been introduced to Canadian history or mention of Indigenous history or Indigenous culture. So I really didn't have any information except from what comes in the media and occasionally people talk about. But and then there was a shift. I moved to Winnipeg for my graduate studies, and my program really focused on Indigenous development. And that's where I got exposed to this whole new area. And I felt like, wow, this is something I was supposed to know from the very get-go. And I also realized in the community and my friends and relatives, a lot of people don't have that knowledge or exposure. And oftentimes they really want to learn. They actually ask these questions: where can we learn about it? How can we get involved? So there is that interest, but people really don't know how to get there. So that's how my initial involvement started.
Thank you so much, Ali. The next question is actually for you as well. So as a newcomer, what is one thing that surprised you when you first began learning about or working with Indigenous people?
One thing that I really, not only surprised, but really appreciated is the spiritual richness in Indigenous communities or Indigenous teachings and knowledge that's been, spread and discussed. I took a course in Indigenous worldviews with my teachers, Elder Dan Thomas and Mark Rommel. And this really was fascinating because not only I was exposed to Indigenous teachings, but also got to experience, ceremonies, sweat lodge, and feel that spirituality. It was in itself a spiritual experience. And I was really able to connect. The spiritual lens of things is often out, not in general conversations. And I feel that added dimension is really something that I really enjoyed. And I could also connect with my own Islamic tradition. I found a lot of points of commonality. But in particular, I found a new area which I wasn't at all exposed, even when you look at different traditions. It's specific to the animal world. That's something I found really fascinating. And two more things, like the methodology that's been used as well through storytelling and oral history, really powerful. I found that to be kind of unique, and that's something that I really learned from.
Thank you so much for sharing, Ali. So the next question is coming back to Connie. If the number of organizations and individuals working on building relationships between Newcomer and Indigenous communities were to increase significantly, what do you think the largest impact on Canada as a whole would be?
That's a wonderful question. Part of me thinks that imagine if we didn't increase it. At the risk of sounding trite, I think Canada we'll have a better future. I mean, it only speaks to our future. Building relationships between newcomers and Indigenous peoples. I mean, this is part of the Canadian landscape that we all share right now. So, I mean, all we are doing is fortifying the foundation upon which the future of our country is going to be based as well, too. I mean, our schools are full of newcomers and Indigenous children. These children are moving up through society, and they are going to be running our country eventually. So we can meet them halfway, right? We can meet them halfway. So I know it's, as I said, it sounds somewhat trite, but I really think by building these opportunities for newcomers to learn about Indigenous peoples and vice versa, only strengthens our entire democracy as a whole. If we have an opportunity to share our successes and move forward in a good way.
Thank you so much. So we will move over to Hani for the next question. Just one last reminder for the audience that after the next, we have 2 more prepared questions, and then we'll be opening up the floor. So just log into Slido, make sure you're in the correct workshop, and if you see a question that is similar to what you would like to ask, make sure you give it a thumbs up so that it can move to the top of the list, and we will be more likely to be able to answer it. So Hani, the next question is for you. It's, do you feel that this type of work is receiving adequate support on a community level, or do you think that individuals and organizations need to make relationship building a higher priority in their communities?
I think every organization and every one of us as individuals, people, groups, I think we should take a role in a reconciliation process. I assume you still can hear me because I hear noise. Okay. Yes. So the support, yes, there is. First of all, there is support that we, as our organization, has gotten even from the government to basically work on this project particularly and develop it. And so we really do appreciate that type of support. We do have a great interest from our partners and other organizations that are willing to learn their role in this reconciliation process, and also learn how they fit in the relational dynamic in building these relationships, because it is, lots of people don't know how to approach this subject, and many of the people are hesitant to make mistakes in approaching this subject. So there's always need for support to make the reconciliation process more impactful, truthful, and practically changing our society. And as Connie and others said, it is for the benefit of our all society. It's not just for one segment of society or Indigenous people, but everyone would benefit from positive change.
Thank you so much, Hani. And our last prepared question of the day is for Clayton. What do you think is the greatest or most common barrier faced when bringing newcomer and Indigenous communities together?
Thank you. I think it's probably fear of the unknown. I've been saying this for probably 30 years now. In Winnipeg, it seems like when non-native people, what they see on the streets or newspapers on TV, they feel that all native people are like that, and they don't realize that how how great we are once they get to know us. I think one of the barriers also too I found with the immigrant community, some of my new friends, is that we basically found each other's humor. So we do a lot of humor, and it really brings down a lot of the barriers. I thought Hani was going to say the most rewarding thing he ever found was meeting Clayton Sandy. I thought he was going to stay there for a minute there, but I found that I find that that's a big part of it. And spending time together, like we've gone out to sweats, been on the road for 3 hours, and I think that was the most rewarding time. Just spending 6 hours in a car traveling to a sweat and back and getting to know each other, and just getting to know each other's families also too. But basically letting down your guard and just treating people like real people. And a lot of times we forget to do that. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers. What they think that we would say if they say something negative. And I think it's just about all education. If we can just sit down and have a good education piece together, the world would be a better place for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clayton. So now we'll be opening up the floor to the questions that are on Slido. Just one more call out to the audience. Feel free to type new questions if you'd like. Remember to scroll through, and if you see something similar to what you'd like to ask, give it a bit of a thumbs up. Now, the first question we're going to be starting out with, I'm actually going to paraphrase a little bit because I've noticed about 3 questions that are very similar to this, but just kind of different wording. It looks like quite a few people are asking, would you be willing to share the toolkit with those attending this workshop? And kind of other questions about the plans for sharing the toolkit in the future, how it's going to be distributed, and if it'll be like a train the trainer method for settlement organizations. So just sort of if Hani or Connie could give us a plan with the distribution for the toolkit.
Thank you. I will maybe answer part, and then Connie, if she wants to answer as well, I'll leave her some room. But basically, we're as we said, we developing this toolkit because there's need for it, and so we're not going to have it for ourselves only. We're going to create a website, and this website will be accessible by everyone, whether they're in Winnipeg, Manitoba, or in Canada, or outside of Canada, if people want to learn. But the idea is, and the focus and objective is to educate newcomers here in Winnipeg and the settlement sector in Winnipeg. It will be accessible and for free to everyone, with some, of course, limitation in terms of making sure that people would not take advantage of it and resell it or for commercial purposes, because it is going to be available. When is going to be available? We're working hard. Connie and Nikki and many other key partners are working really hard with Immigration Partnership Winnipeg to make sure that we can finish all other themes. I think we have 8 themes in total, and we did 2 piloted as indicated by Connie in January of 2020. By 2021, the hope is in summer, we get it done, all finished, and uploaded on a specific website that we're currently working on trying to get it done. So once done, we will launch the whole project. We'll make sure that everyone, whether they're in Manitoba or in Canada, would know about it, because this is a massive project and it's very dear and close to our hearts, and we want to make sure that everyone knows about it.
Thank you, Hani. Connie, did you want to add anything to that? Do we still have Connie? Oh, I think we might have lost Connie again. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. So I'm going to combine these next 2 questions because they're very similar again. So what are the first steps to develop meaningful relationships with Indigenous communities? And then also asking if any advice to SPOs who would like to start these types of partnerships with local nations, and how to best step aside and center Indigenous and newcomer voices. Oh, and we do have Connie back now. Connie, did you want to add anything about the...
Yeah, I can. I just didn't want to cut you off. Again, my apologies, folks. I don't know what's up today. I believe one of the questions when Hani responded was about the train the trainer model. And yes, the intent of this is a train the trainer model. Again, too, I want to say, and I use this analogy all the time when working with teachers, is that something like this is a guide. I always call it a recipe. And absolutely, you take it then as a facilitator, as a settlement worker, and you make it your own and adapt it. So yes, it is following a train the trainer model. Absolutely. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Connie. Okay, so we'll move back to the next question, which again is first steps to developing meaningful relationships with Indigenous communities, and any advice to give to SPOs who would like to start these types of partnerships with local nations.
I'll answer a piece of that. I think it's important to do exactly what I think Immigrant Partnership Winnipeg did. Come to our community and don't be afraid to make cold calls to our organizations. Introduce yourselves and let people know exactly what you want or what you're doing. I know a lot of times our people get frustrated by doing surveys and stuff like that, but if you come and you bring food, we'll accept you with open arms. And just be truthful about the purpose of your call or your presentation. But if you come to anybody's more than welcome to come to any powwow in Canada and basically talk to the people who are organizing it, set up a table or set up a booth or whatever, and just start that way and just be kind to each other. It's very simple. Thanks.
Jamie, if I add one thing that is, I can echo what Clayton says. There's difference between creating an impression and creating a relationship. If you want to create an impression, you go and you put the best looks that you have or whatever image you want to create for yourself, and you create that impression. But impression would not last. Relationship last. And if you want to connect with people based on relationship building, then you have to do some self-digging, I call it. And the self-digging means you have to train yourself to be truthful, genuine, and also ask yourself, why do I want to do this? If you get the answer first, then you move on to connect with people, whether they're Indigenous or others. And your staff, if you're an organization, start with your staff. Like reconciliation, start with your own staff first. And then once that you distinguish between impression making or relationship building, then you move and connect with people like Clayton and others, as he said, and they would, the other party would know if you are after impression or relationship building.
Another recommendation was don't hire a consultant to come out and do this for you. Do it yourself. Basically, it's sort of important if you want to get it done. That's what I was told by an elder many years ago. If you want something done, get it done. Do it yourself, and it'll get done the way you want it to. Get out there and do it yourself, and because it's your relationship, and you have to stand in your truth and be honest with yourself and get out there and do it. And don't be afraid. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clayton and Hani. Did anyone else want to add to that? No? Okay, so we will move on to the next question, which is, do you also have school boards and link service providers as partners on this toolkit? And what are your plans to engage them in the process? So maybe Hani, you could speak about the language component?
So I'm trying to understand the question. Is the school boards, you said?
Yes, they're asking if we have school boards and link service providers. So I think they're asking about the basically curriculum development and the language component.
Okay, so the language. Okay, so let me start from the end of the question. The language component, we also had a partnership created with one of our key partners, Manso, here in Winnipeg, and through that partnership, we created like a relationship among teachers who teach English as a second or additional language, and we borrowed the contents with the assistance and the guidance and the directions from one of our Indigenous engagement coordinators that work for Immigration Partnership Winnipeg, Rose. We took the contents from the very same toolkit, and that is the London Treaty concepts, the two themes, and we created a curriculum now for newcomers to learn English language, but through an Indigenous process, Indigenous contents, to learn the English language. So this is very unique, and also we're aiming to launch this project, which is very much a branch of the Indigenous Orientation Toolkit, hopefully in maybe mid or the end of January of 2021. And this is, for us, is a very exciting news. So yes, that's how we connect with service providers. That's how we connect with one of the federally funded essential services to newcomers, and that is English as an additional language training. And we want to establish that. So imagine you will have service providers in the settlement sector being educated on Indigenous people by Indigenous people through the train the trainer format, and then they will educate their clients. Also, teachers who teach English as an additional language will allow the newcomers to learn about Indigenous culture and traditions through Indigenous-based contents, and they will learn. So we tackling different aspects of the newcomers' needs, and I think many of the partners will be engaged in this process. So it is extremely exciting process, and it is very usefully practical and hopefully beneficial to everyone involved.
Thank you so much, Hani. I sort of lost my place in the questions, so I'm just going to go with the one that I see right here, but I'll get organized and get myself back onto the order that we were originally going. So this one here is a question for Clayton. Do you think that there needs to be more representation from the Indigenous community in the settlement sector?
Yeah, I think that yeah, it's important to have an equal balance of male and female on both sides, different genders and different ages, and I think that we all come with a different perspective, and even if you're able to to go out to different communities or different reserves and get that perspective, because I find that most of the communities, the 63 communities we have in Winnipeg, we're all not the same, and it's important to get their input also too. So it doesn't hurt to reach out to different tribal councils or even different schools in Manitoba and get a different perspective. But it's important again to have that balance. Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clayton. Okay, so the next question here is the toolkit distributed upon arrival, or are there specific ways to apply and distribute it? So I'm assuming this question will be for when it is launched. What would be the plan there?
Okay, so the toolkit, the objective of the toolkit is once it is done and available to be used, is we talked about the trainers. So we had piloted the two themes, and we had 16 organizations from the settlement sectors. Around 25 to 26 people attended who are frontliners working in the settlement sectors. They were trained on the contents of the on the land and treaty concepts or themes. The idea is once this toolkit is finished and available on the website, people can access it, service providers can access it, and they can start training, orienting their respective clients and maybe staff members and the communities that they are connected to with full package, and they choose in whichever way, as Connie alluded to, and that is they basically can customize the information that is available without altering the essence of the information, but to customize to fit their need within their own local context with respect to their service provision or their staff needs or clients' needs.
Thank you, Hani. So just to clarify that, what you're saying is that the settlement serving organizations will be able to sort of decide how it works for their program and be able to adapt it to their own clients. Is that correct? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So we're just about out of time for our presentation. I'm going to choose one last question here. Would be... Sorry, sometimes the questions move in the list when people are adding thumbs up. So the final question for the day will be, how will you be evaluating the impacts of the toolkit over time?
Connie, if you want to assist with that, but I can start. So I think the evaluation, there's evaluation component will be attached to the creation of the toolkit. And we will make sure that we will have an evaluation tool or tools. The impact, I can go back to the very beginning of my story and what I assessed and we evaluated the cultural shift within our circle of partners, a circle of community members who we did a little study, a little social experiment, and I'm going to go through it really fast because of time. We had two examples where people moved. I was involved in this journey, and CBC News, the radio, and I can't remember the year. I believe it was around 2007. And we kind of went through the social experiment where two people, they know little about Indigenous people. They had negative views because they don't have enough information and no proper orientation was available. We spend a day of knowledge and journey through history and land-based education. At the end of the day, the next day, we saw the cultural shift, the empathy, and the complete understanding of what position the Indigenous people are in currently and how they move, those two people, those two examples, they move from negative positions to positive, supportive, allyship type of position and connected. So information is powerful, education is very much needed. Orientation is extremely practically useful in this case to move people and notice that cultural shift. So we will, that's in terms of impact. In terms of evaluation, as I said, we will have the tools to measure that impact, and hopefully we will have the results that we can share with people on the very same website that I mentioned earlier. Connie, if you have something else specific you want to add?
I think you captured it all, Hani. Just one thing, and you said it at the beginning of your response, that evaluation will be embedded in the package. You know, so there's always an exit form of some type at the end. Again, all of this, I think, is like a giant snowball rolling down a hill too. People take it and it keeps rolling and it gets better as it goes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Connie and Hani. And thank you also to Clayton and Ali for joining us for the panel discussion. Thank you all of you for all of your wonderful questions. I'm so sorry that we didn't get a chance to answer all of them. If you do still have questions that were unanswered, or if you have additional questions that you think of later, I would like to invite you to email Immigration Partnership Winnipeg, which the website for the Fostering Safe Spaces report was posted in the questions there, so you can take a look at that report. And then also you can check us out on our website at ipwinnipeg.org. So it's ipwinnipeg.org. And the contact information is there to ask further questions later. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much to our presenters. And I hope you all have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of the conference.